All right. So this is a UX research video around how to gather user feedback, and we're going to be specifically focusing on interviewing people to learn more about their needs throughout this video. And we're going to cover both user testing as well as discovery research processes and techniques. So as a quick process breakdown of how I tend to run user research interviews and pretty much anything I do. And for background, I'm a UX researcher for a major tech company, and I've run at least hundreds of user interviews throughout my career. And the breakdown is always similar to this when I try to structure what I'm doing. So first step is determining research goals and requirements. Essentially, why are you running this research and what do you hope to learn about it? And then recruiting the participants who you're going to speak to, writing the interview guide, followed by conducting research sessions. And obviously those two are very closely related because the interview guide will really dictate how the research sessions run, at least in most cases. Sometimes you realize you were trying to research the wrong thing. Followed by analyzing the data that you get from the research sessions and then reporting the findings. And because there is so much content to cover in this entire process, for this video, I'm going to focus on numbers 1, 2, and 3. And then in a following video, I'll cover numbers 4, 5, and 6 to get the full end-to-end process of research. And this will also be much more like we're thinking through a problem together rather than just a huge list of do exactly this, this, this. In terms of the overall process, I will say there's a website for the Nielsen-Norman Group, which is nngroup.com. It's a fantastic resource for learning more about research methodologies. So be sure to check out the Nielsen-Norman Group if you want very specific information or more specific information. Once again, that's nngroup.com. And I'll also be sure to include a link to this slide deck in the description so you can check that out in case it's something that's helpful to you. And for the purpose of this video, we're going to use Spotify as an example of a product to research because A, most people are really familiar with Spotify, and B, the people who use Spotify is super diverse. It's a really, pretty much almost anyone that is comfortable using technology is a potential customer of Spotify, which makes it really interesting in terms of things like recruitment or even just thinking about how to run research on the scope of a product this big with so many different areas to consider. So with that in mind, we're going to jump into the first part, which is determining the goal of research. So there's two really big buckets that you can think about research in. So there's generative research, and then there's evaluative research. So for generative research is something that I almost always call discovery research. You're trying to define a problem to solve. So things like, how are people using our product? Why do people use our product? What's working well with the product, or perhaps what's not working so well with the product? So in the case of a product like Spotify, asking for specific things like, do you remember the last time you used Spotify? Can you show me what you did? And they might say something like, oh, I went to recently played. I checked out something that I listened to a while ago, and I started listening to it. Already you're starting to learn how people interact and use the product, which can then help you understand where to focus on for any improvements. Maybe they'll even talk through something that didn't work so well for them. And then also there's evaluative research, which is also called user testing in many cases. So let's say you found a problem to solve in the discovery research, and now you want to test a solution that was made to solve that problem. So some examples there, can people search music effectively? Can people make playlists? Or how is a new design working in comparison to the old design? So just as a random example, let's say you decide to move the search box way up top here because you thought people would find it much more easily. But then through user testing, you find that people are actually really struggling to find that search box. And in that case, research gives you an opportunity to readdress or solve that problem before that change goes live to the entire audience of users. So that's where user testing can come in really handy to tighten things up and make sure things are working as well as they can be. And the first step to making this happen is recruiting participants. So I have at the top here important, you will not learn anything by asking the wrong users the right questions. So let's say the people that use your product all behave in a somewhat similar manner, and then you find somebody who isn't a user of your product that's actually vastly different than your core user set. Essentially, if that person tells you their problems with your product, while that will be valuable information to potentially improve your product for that particular type of person, if your goal is to improve the product for existing users or a specific problem of existing users, you're not going to learn anything from somebody that fundamentally behaves differently than those people. So With this in mind, do your best to avoid something called sampling bias. And in this particular website, they call it undercoverage bias, but we're talking about the same thing essentially here. So in this wonderful little image, we have a population image and then a sample image. And let's say the red dots are people that behave in one way, and the green dots are people that behave in a different way. Depending on how you pull people out from your overall population to interview, you could end up with a sample that isn't reflective of your overall population. In this case, you have a lot more green dots than red dots. So when you talk to people about their problems or frustrations or what's working well, you might think that the needs of the green dots are by far the most important, and those are what you should be focusing on to make the biggest impact. When in reality, the red dots far outweigh the green dots in terms of the number of users for your particular website or product or whatever the case is. So it could make you focus on the wrong problem to solve if you're trying to make the biggest improvements for the most amount of people first. It's not to say that these people that are shown as green dots, that their needs aren't as important as the needs of the red dots. It'll just give you a slightly biased viewpoint that might not be reflective of your actual user population and what problems you should be focusing on first. So it's very important that this process is handled well, or you might actually end up running into a situation where research is actually pointing you in the wrong direction as opposed to the right direction. So how do you even learn about who to talk to or why to talk to them? Basically, quantitative analytical data. And quantitative, I think quantity, when I think quantitative, it typically results in big numbers of data. It's not small interview samples, which is called qualitative, if you're talking to 5 users, for example, for an interview. So something like Google Analytics can really help you learn about the users of your products, assuming you have it installed, which if not, might be a great idea to do so. But you can learn things like the gender percentages for the use of your product, the age ranges for the use of your product. Is this primarily 18 to 24-year-olds? Is it 60-plus-year-olds? When you're thinking about how to properly recruit and sample people, getting things like that right are really important because the needs of those different people could be vastly different. What countries your users live in? Let's say that 60% of the users for your product live in the US, so that's where all your focus is. But then 40% of the users live in somewhere like India or Russia. If you only focus on the needs of the people in the US, you could really end up alienating or losing opportunity to people that speak different languages or have different ways of interacting with technology. So it's really important that you don't box yourself in unless you're doing it intentionally. For example, if you purposefully just want to learn about people in India or just want to learn about people in the US, that's totally valid research. But you should be focused and understand that you're doing that on purpose. So you learn the things that you need to learn and don't end up potentially missing out on some important insights. Also, you can learn what pages or parts of your product are the most popular. If there's a particular page that's by far the most visited by people and you haven't researched it before, something like Google Analytics can then point you to that so you can focus your efforts where they might be most impactful. And there's tons of data in something like Google Analytics, but there's also other ways of getting this info. But the important thing here is learning about who uses your product so you can properly sample and then speak to them. And while Google Analytics is awesome for learning about the users of your product as a broad concept, you can't match a real person to the information they give you because it's all aggregated. It's just a big number of people. So something like a screener survey that you could send out to the people that use your product can then help you match a real person to a particular demographic. So gender or age, even something like comfort and confidence using technology. As a rough question, I'm not saying use this exact question, it's off the top of my head, but on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not at all confident and 5 being very confident, how confident are you in your ability to fix technological issues on your computer? That's kind of a long-winded question, so I'm not suggesting you use it, but you can learn things about how confident someone is using particular technology, because someone really not confident at all in something like Spotify might just run a quick search, type in something like David Bowie, and then run through their song, where someone that's a lot more confident might explore some of the other features like Made for You or whatever the case might be. So it's important that you just think about these things so you can learn what are the main problems of people who aren't super technologically confident. What are the main problems for people who are? So you can then solve on fixing the right things for the right people. And very broadly speaking, you want to start with 5 users per distinct user type or user group in your interviews. So if you have no idea where the problem is or what to focus on, you can just start with 5 users to figure out, like, is there a common pattern in these 5 people about a problem? If so, maybe we should focus on that problem first and then see where we go after we try to solve it and then speak to 5 more people. But if you have very distinct user groups, kind of remembering the red dot to green dot example here in the population, you'd want to speak to 5 people in the red dot sample and then 5 people in the green dot sample. Learn about what are their needs. Do they overlap? Are they super different? And then you can decide if more interviews past that are worthwhile. So I'm not saying 5 is all you need to speak to. That's almost never ever true, but that's kind of the bare minimum where you're trying to get about 80% of the insights throughout 5 interviews, so you don't interview 50 people and learn very little new information after the first 5 or 10 or whatever the case might be. Just be purposeful in the way that you sample people and keep running interviews until you feel like you aren't learning anything that's worth learning anymore, and then you can start focusing on the solutions. And also something important to note, I mentioned sampling bias before, but offer incentives upfront for participation because it can really help reduce bias. Because when you think about who's going to be willing to spend their time to speak with you, in the case of something like Spotify, maybe it's people that really love Spotify. They listen to it every day in the car when they get home from work. Whatever the case is, they think it's awesome and they want to let you know about it. So they're willing to speak with you. Alternatively, there might be people that really hate Spotify or hate something about Spotify, and they really want to talk to you to let you know why Spotify sucks so much. Essentially, that's a form of sampling bias because you're not getting an accurate breakdown of people that think Spotify is just okay, or your more average user. Where if you give someone something like a $25 Amazon gift card for a 30-minute interview, your sample becomes much wider to anyone that wants a free gift card, which is a really big sample of people. So offering incentives can actually reduce bias, and also it'll make getting people to be willing to speak with you far, far, far more easy. I've had to cancel interviews before where the person seemed so sad they were losing that gift card, I actually decided to run it anyways. So it definitely works, and it's something that not only helps you recruit, but also helps get a much wider sample of people. And then as far as writing the interview guide, which will be kind of the backbone for speaking to people and referencing your questions as you speak to people, there's a typical flow for pretty much any interview guide that I make. There's an intro to let the participant know why they're in the interview, and also a way to thank them for participating up front. You then want to set the participant in their experience, which basically means helping them become comfortable thinking about whatever the mental space of your product. In the case of Spotify, it's really easy. You can have them think about music, and we'll cover how to do that in just a little bit. Then there's the core research questions, which for discovery are the big picture ideas you want to solve. Or for user testing, you can have them run through some tasks to solve. And then it ends with the final thoughts, which is basically let them know that all your questions are done, but if they have any final thoughts that are important to share, they can do that. And then a quick thank you. And also you can give them the incentive at that time. But before we jump into each of these specific sections and how to go through it, I want to thank the sponsor of this particular video, which is Skillshare. So at least at the time of the release of this video, it's the start of 2020, and this is a chance to make 2020 a year where you explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity with Skillshare's online classes. There's a lot of awesome stuff on Skillshare, and what you find might just surprise and inspire you. And Skillshare is an online learning community that offers membership with meaning, so there's a ton of stuff to explore in here, and it results in you being able to create real projects and also find the support of fellow creatives that are also taking these classes. This particular class has 46,000 students that have pulled value from this particular one. So that's really amazing to think about. And it also gives you a chance to learn and grow with short classes that fit your busy schedule. So in case of this particular class, if we go to browse here, there's all sorts of things like graphic design, illustration, photography, but the UI, UX design section might be of particular interest to you. So if I click that, one thing that caught my eye was this Intro to UX class with the fundamentals of usability. And this class is run by the Director of Research at User Testing, which is a very well-known and respected UX research platform. So I think when it comes to pulling even more value over what I'm teaching you in this video, this is another way to get even a bigger idea of all the things you can be doing, a really good overview for people that are newer to UX and UX research. So I think it's really cool that they have this sort of content on their platform. And also Skillshare is super affordable, especially if you compare it to something like a pricey in-person class or workshop. An annual subscription to Skillshare is less than $10 a month. But as an added bonus to the people that are watching this video, in the description, there's a link that you can click to get 2 free months of premium membership, and then you can use that to explore whatever content you're most passionate about. So a ton of amazing stuff on the platform. Click the link in the description to get 2 whole free months just to check it out and see if it's something you want to continue using. And doing so directly supports this channel, which I appreciate. And I also appreciate Skillshare and sponsoring this video. So check that out when you have some spare time once you're done watching this. But for now, back to what we were just covering previously. So now that we're back here, let's cover the intro section, which is pretty basic, but it's just a chance to let them know why they're talking to you and how and why their feedback is valuable. So in the case of something like Spotify, where it's a really broad product, you can just say something like, I work at Spotify, and we're trying to improve the product for people such as yourself. So I want to learn from you today to hopefully make some improvements that would make Spotify a bit better for you in the future. And it's also important to let the person know nothing you say or do will be wrong. Any feedback is really helpful and good feedback, but also most importantly, honest feedback, whether it's positive or constructive, is what matters most. And because I work as a dedicated UX researcher, I'll often tell people something like, I had nothing to do with this particular design. I didn't make this product. So anything you tell me, I promise you're not going to hurt my feelings. And the goal here is just to help the people that are making this focus on the right things because they just want to make this product as good as they possibly can. So honest feedback is by far the most helpful. Don't worry about anything you say to me. I promise you won't hurt my feelings. And it's just a chance to set up a good rapport with the participant. Hopefully it'll allow them to become more comfortable in the process, both to share their feelings and also any sort of interview situation is really awkward most of the time for most people. I am not naturally a super extroverted person that would normally just go up to people and randomly start talking about whatever the case might be. So I understand how people might feel that this is awkward and strange, and this is your chance to make that as least awkward and strange for anyone else as you possibly can. Also, you want to set the participant in their experience. So what does that mean? What does setting someone in their experience mean? So here's an example of how you could do that. You could say something like, today we're talking about Spotify, which is obviously a music product. So I'm curious, when do you typically find yourself listening to music? And I should maybe make this a question. There we go. And then when they start talking about where they typically listen to music, you could follow up and say something like, what devices do you tend to listen to Spotify on? And you want to be vague purposefully so you don't box them into an answer. If you say something like, do you listen on your computer or on your phone or both? You might miss out on if somebody listens on their Apple Watch while they're working out or something else like that. So always be vague during follow-ups, which we'll also cover more in the actual interviewing section. Some more examples. So what was the last thing you listened to on Spotify? And do you remember how you found that? Things that just ease people in without getting really highly specific. For example, if I had a very specific question for this product, I could ask somebody something like, so where would you find the credits information for a song? Which I had no idea before I made this video, but there's actually a way to show credits for a particular song in Spotify. But I'd assume that most people wouldn't know that this exists. I don't know what value I'd really even get by asking about something this specific in a product. And you run the risk of alienating that person, making them feel stupid or like they don't know enough about the product to provide valuable information. So do your best to avoid things that might trip people up or make them feel a bit uncomfortable, especially in this intro section. Sometimes you have to ask difficult questions, but it shouldn't be from the very start. You should ease people in as nice as you can. Because the goal here is you just want the participant to think about the problem space that your product is attempting to solve or improve. And past that, we get into the core research questions. And when you're writing questions, it's really important that you don't do things like bias or lead the participant. So for an example, let's say in the Made For You section, your team just made the Your Top Songs 2019 feature. If your intro was something like, hey, I have something that I'm really excited to show you. My team just worked on a great new feature called Your Top Songs of 2019, and I'm just curious, what do you think about it? So what's the problem in asking a question like that? Basically, you're letting that participant know, like, oh, we think this thing is really awesome, and we probably really hope that you think it's awesome too. And as a result, that person is very unlikely to tell you, I think Your Top Songs 2019 sucks. It wasn't for me. Because something called social desirability bias comes into play, where really broadly speaking, people want to be liked, and they probably want you to like them too, even though they don't know you super well. So if you ask a question in a way that really biases them to think that they should like something, they're much more likely to tell you that they do, as opposed to saying something like, hey, We just worked on a new feature called Your Top Songs of 2019, and we want to see how is that working for you? Is this something that you found to be helpful, or was it perhaps not so useful to you? In that case, the goal is that that person will be much more comfortable telling you if they didn't like it. Of course, that question is just off the top of my head, but it's important to balance things as best you can so you don't bias them in a particular way. Also, you want to avoid using words that prompt the participant to do something, like, now filter the results to find only shoes. Terrible question for Spotify, they're not going to find many shoes here. But as a more appropriate example, you could say something like, how would you search for classical music on Spotify? And when you say search, there's this box here that says search right in it. So they might be much more likely to use search and type classical in order to find classical music, as opposed to using something like browse, which might even be the more appropriate way, if they know it exists, to then try to find the classical music section within browse, in which case it's right here. So be really mindful of how you ask questions to not lead them to do specific things in your particular product. And in discovery research, you tend to want to keep things pretty high level to learn about how your product is currently working in the eyes of your participant, although discovery can also be very focused to something like the search experience or playlists or whatever the case might be. Just don't box them into highly specific things within whatever niche you're trying to learn about. So an example is have them explain how they're currently using the product or that part of the product currently, and then ask them, so how would you say this product or feature is currently working for you? And if they say something like good or not so good, always follow up and be ready to do that. If I'm writing an interview guide, I won't write these follow-up questions exclusively, but sometimes a little note to remind yourself, follow up if you have to, is really good. Because if someone says, this isn't working so well, if you don't find out why, you won't know how to potentially improve it for that person. And when it comes to user testing, you typically want to run them through preset tasks that would allow you to learn about the new feature you developed. So in the case of this particular example, you could have them do something like add a song to a playlist. And then as a follow-up, you could ask them, so now that you added this song to a playlist, let's say you don't want it to be there anymore, how would you go about removing it? And you could have them show you that, which would help you capture the full process of how someone might create a playlist, add songs to a playlist, remove songs from a playlist, and then actually remove the playlist itself. And knowing how a feature works end-to-end like that can be very valuable in learning what parts of that feature might be broken or might need some improvement, so you can make sure you focus your team or yourself on the right things. And very broadly speaking, I'll talk more about this in the actual interviewing section, but less is often more when writing questions. Where possible, you want your research to feel natural and conversational, as opposed to just reading off a list of pre-written questions, because you want to be nimble and allow that participant to tell you what they care about most. And this time is about them and what they need from you, as opposed to what you need from them and your very specific needs. If you cut someone off and keep running them down a list of highly specific questions, they might start to think that you don't actually care about their thoughts or feelings, and the feedback they provide might be less valuable. Also, if your research was going down a path that was actually the wrong path, this is your opportunity to learn that, we might have been focusing on the wrong things, and we should redevelop or redivert our efforts to something that will be much more impactful, because 4 out of 5 people talked about this thing that we didn't even ask them questions about. And those are perhaps the biggest wins of a research situation, where you really learn where you should be focusing as opposed to where you thought you should be focusing. We'll definitely talk more about this in the interviewing section in the next video, but do keep that in mind. Don't write 50 questions and just run through a checklist. Those interviews will be really awkward and probably kind of uncomfortable for you to run, and also much less effective potentially than they would have been if you had not done something like that. The last part of the interview guide is just a final thoughts and thank you section. So for example, that's all I have for questions, but before we end, is there anything we missed talking about that you think would be important for the team working on this product to know? You might get some really insightful answers there, so it's important that you give people an opportunity to talk. And at the end, just thank them for their time and then provide them with the incentive that you promised them. And remember, this is just part 1 of this. So in the description, once I get the second video made, I'll link the second video, which will cover actually conducting the research sessions, then analyzing the data, and then reporting the findings to the people who can pull value from them. So I do hope this video was helpful for you. It's a lot of content to cover pretty quickly. And if this video was helpful for you, consider subscribing to this channel. I do my best to keep creating new content just like this as much as I possibly can. And of course, if you have further questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section. I can hopefully help you, or other people that watch this video can help you get a little bit more detail if you have any lingering questions or stuff you need more information on. And past that, thank you once again to the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. Remember that at the top of the description, I'll leave a link for you to get 2 free months of Skillshare. If you go and use that 2 free months, it actually helps this channel out and helps me keep making more videos. So that's appreciated. Thank you again to Skillshare. But that is all I have for now. Until the next video, thank you so much for watching.